Welcome Wargamers back to the Mortal Realms. Since the launch of Age of Sigmar, there's been a nagging question in my mind and the mind of many others. What is the day-to-day life of a citizen of the realms like? This was a huge deal when AOS first dropped and there was very little information about the realms themselves. And this is a question that's always been somewhat vague or very faction specific, as a lot of factions lead very extreme lifestyles not indicative of the norm, meaning, fire slayers live very different lives for some, say, scourge privateers. Well, today we're going to go like full Bruce Springsteen. We're going to talk about the struggles of the blue-collar working class, the everyman in the realms. And I'm able to do this based on the lore that recently dropped in the new Age of Sigmar role-playing game, Soulbound, produced by Cubicle 7. They were kind enough to send me an advanced digital copy, and I'm so grateful because this is an incredible book. I've never played an RPG before, so I can't really comment on the rules and gameplay, but I have to say, it's hands down the best introduction for the lore of understanding what the realm is like and what people have to live through day to day. So I want to say up front that the real flavor of day-to-day living in the realms is super varied upon what realm you live in, and where in that realm you live. For those new to the setting, imagine each realm as a disc where the magical, theme of fire, life, death, whatever, so on, defines the environment around it. Each of them has mountains and volcanoes and forests and fields, every type of biome. It's just kind of colored with a filter based on its magic. Well, towards the center of that disc, things are super stable and fairly normal. In fact, if you don't like the idea of realms in Age of Sigmar and you're more of like, I prefer the Warhammer Fantasy Battles feeling, you could easily set your army's lore to be in the center of a realm, say Guran for example, and it would be not super different from the old world. And that's totally cool, and I encourage people to do that often. But as you start to move towards the edges of the realm, the magic of it really intensifies, right? Whatever theme it has gets really amped up, and that's where a lot of the character comes in. Now, I have a series on several of the realms detailing what they are like, right? And spoiler, this book allows me to finish that series for the future. But I also want to focus on the character of each realm because life is super different depending on what realm you're from. Before we tackle the differences, let's talk about what they all have in common. No matter what realm you're in, there's safety in numbers. Massive cities make up the vast majority of civilized life in the realms, filled with architectural and scientific marvels, impossible skyscrapers, and monuments. These cities are filled with bustling and an ever-expanding life, right? Markets, taverns, city guards, water supplies, caravan farmers, all these things that make any pre-industrial civilization of man happen. There's also gambling, brothels, shady dens of thieves, and entertainment, whether it's things like gladiatorial pits, racetracks, plays, music, or all of the above. Again, this is what I'm saying, if you just don't like the idea of the realms, set your city in the dead center of the realm and it'll be very much what we know from traditional fantasy. Gur, the realm of beasts, is the notable exception, as having immobile fortresses is more of a liability, and you can go see my video on Gur for that, but instead of towering walls, they form largely nomadic tribal camps that cover vast expanses. But more on point of how these are similar, there are always farmers and traders and swindlers and warriors and government officials. It's when you start to splash in the flavor of each realm that it gets more interesting than, say, a historic village from our own world. For example, the city dynamic in Hammerhall is fascinating. The city itself was built around a colossal realm gate. Half of the city is in Akshi and half of it is in Guran. And this fact makes it way more interesting as a location because there's inherently a division between the people on one side or the other. But that difference works in the city's favor. Crops are hard to grow in Akshi. The soil is tough and blackened because it's all fire magic stuff. But harvests grow with unchecked abundance over in Guran, Realm of Life. And that is the food capital of this megacity. But there's a problem with Guran. The verdant magic makes life grow so abundantly that it would soon swallow the city whole if not regulated. So what they do is they channel a moat of lava and ashed earth from Akshi through the realm gate and burn away the constantly growing forest, or at least kind of keep it at bay. This interaction is wholly unique to Hammerhall. I mean, it's possible to assume other cities can be built with other realm gates like that. It's just that we don't know of any that have the same level of symbiotic relationship. The difference between realms also creates the need for them to interact, particularly when it comes to trade. While there are farmers and traders from every realm, some areas are far more bountiful than others. So let's do another example, right? There are a few farmers in Chaman, realm of metal, right? Because the earth is mineral rich, full of dense metals, so plants have a hard time taking really deep root there. So they have fewer farmers, but they have way more mines than anywhere else, and those deposits of ore are brought up, forged into weapons, trinkets, tools, and then sold and traded for food. Conversely, Gur, realm of beasts, the intensity of wildlife puts its citizens in constant danger, right? You can't build stable structures like a mine or a farm because the world around you is constantly in motion and trying to eat you. However, they have an abundance of meat because there's no shortage of things to hunt, provided you know how to hunt them. And so the cities in Gur will trade the folks in Chaman for, food, for raw metals and weapons and so on. So as you expand into the realms and you get a sense of their pros and cons, it also dictates how these, everyday folk, farmers, traders, and that kind of thing, can work in a symbiotic way. It's the characters of the realms that gives them interesting dynamic that requires them to work together. It makes this web of cities of order so interesting. So if you want to build lore around your adventure or your faction, play up what realm they are in or they come from. How would that affect their ability to get tools or food or water or reinforcements? And as you start to move out from city life, things get more dangerous. It's easy to think that this is just a bunch of big cities. But as the forces of order try desperately to stake claim in the realms, you'll have small villages, outposts, fishing communities forming on natural waterways. Outside the city walls, people live in constant danger. They may pool together their resources and hire a free guild regiment to act as a default army, but even then, this is largely to buy them time as a rearguard action, right? Because if a full chaos army rolls up and there's just one free guild division, protecting a small village, they're going to get rolled over. So the farmers can escape this way, right? We'll buy ourselves time. And the threats to these outsiders outside the city are many, right? You got roving chaos warbands, greenskins, just natural occurring monsters and beasts. You have, things that live in the sea that come ashore. You got thieves, poachers, and none of that includes the normal stuff that this life entails, like, say, crop rotation, over-farming, not having quick access to trade or tools, and so this life is dominated by fiercely independent folks with a pioneer spirit. But their role is as essential as it is dangerous, because taking those first steps outside the city walls to help settle the land for expansion, and they also provide food and resources needed for those who live in these cities back home. From realm to realm, these outposts are battered by different things. So, for example, like in Chaman, acid rain, everything has to be built to withstand that. Firestorms sweep through Akshi, thick vines can choke out crops in Guran, and the lifeless soil of Shaiish rejects fertile plant life. All of these things are naturally occurring parts of life that are constantly pushing against the taming of the lands. Securing these expansive lands can be a challenge, and I mentioned before that a large enough community may pool its resources to hire a free guild army, and that's true. But if a large city wants to expand and, say, absorb a nearby village around it, they may even offer assistance, having a free guild regiment march from town to town, week after week on patrol, ensuring that inhabitants are safe and productive. Some cities will hire, sellswords or mercenaries to defend themselves, or even convicts as crude forms of early warning systems. Really what I'm trying to get at is the idea that the baseline is pretty much the fantasy world that we knew from Warhammer Fantasy Battles, so if that appeals to you, you can absolutely do that. But the real flavor and the need for each of these realms to be kind of in concert with one another comes from expanding, right? Shaman won't be able to make enough food to have a real bustling population, but Gur can help them with that, as my example from earlier. And that's just one. I mean, I know there's dozens of examples in that in the books, but what I'm saying is that it gets more interesting and they become more important to one another the further out from the center you get. So let's talk about why is this cool, right? Why is the diversity of life amongst realms, but also the consistent needs of mankind and that kind of stuff, why is that important and cool? Well, I like that the baseline is not different than fantasy battles, right? Big cities, rural farming communities, and all the things that you'd expect with that level of, society, right? Blacksmiths, taverns, gambling, farming, fishing, trading. But it's the inclusion of these wild and exceedingly interesting environments that brings them to life. It also is meant to showcase how adaptable people can be, and the different realms demonstrate how we can flourish if allowed to. In fact, it makes the Age of Myth seem way more believable. The fact that all these things are working together and the realm gates exist to help facilitate trade, you can see how in the Age of Myth, when everything was booming in a good way, this could totally happen. If you are interested in learning more about daily life or a more kind of like a zoomed in view of what average cities will look like, 2 books I definitely recommend are City of Secrets and Spear of Shadows. They demonstrate city life in vastly different environments, and I can't recommend them enough. So friends, thank you so much for watching this video with me or listening in over on the podcast form. Kind of getting a sense of what day-to-day life is like in the realms. It's a kind of a huge topic because the realms themselves are so different. So if you are interested in learning more about, how life is interpreted a bit differently in each of them, go ahead and check out my series on the different realms. I'm contributing to it now more regularly because Soulbound presented us with lore for the realms that we didn't have a whole lot of information on before, and I think that it can be really, really cool. It's hopefully a useful tool to help you come up with exactly what kind of realm you want to center your army around. So thank you so much for listening. I hope to catch you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.